Will Justin Trudeau finally get the trade trouble he deserves, or perhaps finally get the trouble that he deserves? Hi, and welcome to another edition of Bourbon and Bullets. That was the headline for an article in the New York Post by Frank Buckley. He's a transplanted Canadian living in the U.S. Who's a professor of economics at the University of George Mason, and I think specifically he's in the Anton Scalia Law School. And he's written for many years and published books about Canadian and U.S. economic policy and trade policy. So the man knows what he's talking about. And he was just after he published this article in the New York Post, he was on the CBC. They had him on, and actually not for the first time, but anyways, so they had him on. And he frankly floored the CBC and made it clear just how much of a bubble that they live in. But here, I'm going to let you watch the clip and decide for yourself.
We talk about NAFTA. We want to ask you about this op-ed piece in the New York Times because there's a lot of talk about it and about the president's ability to make decisions. What is your reaction to that piece?
Well, in the op-ed, by the way, I'm at Scalia Law School at George Mason, not American University, but the point of my article was, what in heaven's name were the Canadians thinking of in all of this? I mean, they decided that really what was important here was things like gender equity and not the auto trade. And they sent down Chrystia Freeland to negotiate, and she went out of her way to convey her contempt for Trump. And that just struck me as about the stupidest thing you could do, unless, of course, you would be just as happy to see the whole thing fail.
Convey her, sorry, can you give that to me again? What example do you have of the minister expressing her views on Donald Trump?
I love that. She's so taken aback. She's like, wait a second, are you criticizing Chrystia Freeland? Don't you know she has a vagina. This is the current year. She's supposed to be idolized. I mean, it's just incredible. She can't believe there's actually being criticism now. And she asked for examples. Now, when Chrystia Freeland made that speech, it was all over the media, including the CBC, about, oh, Chrystia Freeland standing up to the big bully Trump. She's going to show him. Yeah, and then reality set in. Then you have to be a diplomat and go out and form relationships and do a trade negotiation and get things done. I actually have to achieve results. You can't just have a vagina and get your position get your trade deal because it's current year. That's, back in the real world, there's tit for tat. There's a little give and take. You can't insult people and then go, hey, they're being mean to me now. Yeah, that's what happens. It's called diplomacy. And now this is a woman that has been honored all over the world for her diplomatic efforts on behalf of Canada. So now let's just analyze. Sending the prime minister goes to India for a game of dress up and invites Khalistani terrorists to public functions. They get into a snit with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia reacts by pulling their diplomats from Canada, and the rest of the world wants nothing to do with the entire little snit. The list goes on. This woman is hopelessly incompetent. When the negotiations with the EU over a trade deal with them broke down, she cried publicly at a press conference. But, anyway. And it's not just the CBC. It's the rest of the Canadian news media. They're all, and don't forget, they are all publicly subsidized. They are all on the public dole. All the big major newspaper chains get millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars, direct, not tax breaks, but direct taxpayer-supported subsidies out of your pocket to these giant news corporations, just like the CBC. It's nothing like the CBC. That's ridiculous. But all the rest of them get huge subsidies, and they're all in the same club. Don't forget it. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's listen to Frank Buckley's response to this absolutely flabbergasted CBC reporter.
Well, if you take a look at the speech she gave last summer at the Foreign Policy magazine GabFest, it basically echoed everything that one reads in the Washington Post about Donald Trump. And the White House took it personally. The White House said, right, we know where she's coming from. She didn't mention my name, but nevertheless. And thereafter, she was completely frozen out of the White House. So she gets to come down and talk to the trade representative here. but that's, and she talks to congressmen, but that's basically about it. So, frankly, if you really wanted a deal, it's too late now. The best thing one could have done would have been to send somebody else to negotiate for Canada.
Well, have someone else negotiate is what you would do if you were a competent government and you lived in the real world and you were acting like an adult. But that's not the Trudeau government. Trudeau is a person that lives to be idolized. He's a massive narcissist, and his cabinet exhibits very similar traits by extension. They don't care about real policy. They don't really care about Canada. They care about being on Bill Maher or being in Time magazine or the New York Times and having them, ooh and caw over them, going, "Oh my God, he's so dreamy," or Chrystia Freeland, "Oh my God, she's such a tough woman, negotiating for Canada, standing up to Trump." Yeah, and the result is nothing. It's just utter incompetence. It doesn't help actual Canadian. Trudeau loves, as if anyone, I don't think anyone with half a brain believes him when he talks about how much he and the Liberal government, this trust fund baby who's never worked a real job day in his life until he had the prime minister's job handed to him because of his famous name. They don't really care about the middle class. They love to talk about caring about the middle class, but they don't. It's everything they do negates that. They don't care about Canadians' jobs for Canada. They don't care about, letting you keep more of your paycheck. They don't care about any of that. They care about these empty platitudes and having the fawning, disgusting liberal media coo over them and talk about their socks, or talk about, her dress, or talk about how she's a tough woman. She's going out there playing with the boys. Chrystia Freeland, yeah, who then turns around and cries, or or screws everything up. Okay, so here's Frank Buckley, this time on Rebel Media, and I think and just more interesting takes on what's going on between the Canada-U.S. trade negotiations and what are the real motivations behind the Liberal incompetency, which I think is worth a listen.
Look, the CBC does have a bit of a problem about the Trudeau cabinet and Chrystia Freeland. And, my analysis is they've lost the gag reflex. I mean, that which would most people find really revoltingly smarmy, and they think, oh, this is just so peachy keen. And the thing is, this is serious. This is really up there. It's about the most important thing that the Canadian government could do is renegotiate NAFTA, and they've gone out of their way to show that they're bloody idiots on the question, right? They took their time. They boasted about their great contacts in Congress, which, rot's a ruck. That's not going to do much. They were frozen out of the White House, and Freeland went out of her way to convey her disgust and with the president. You couldn't. There are two explanations. One is this is really, really stupid. The other explanation is they wanted to fail.
Yeah, I actually disagree with him there. He thinks that the real reason is that they wanted to fail. And then Ezra Levant actually agreed with them, thinking that it was the latter, that yes, the Liberals really want NAFTA to fail. I disagree. I don't think they do. I think it is just they're really that stupid and they're that utterly incompetent, because they must know, even Gerald Butts knows that it's a political poison pill to go into election having totally failed at NAFTA negotiations. There's really no way they can spin it. Yeah, they're going to get the votes of the dairy farmers in Quebec, but that's not going to be enough to win them the election. And they know that, a huge part of their electorate in Southern Ontario are the auto workers, and they are going to be, hurt beyond belief. It's the worst thing that has ever happened to them. So, and then there are many, many other sectors across the country that it's going to affect, and it's going to affect the middle class that as I said, that they proclaim to care about, and but clearly they don't, and because they don't, their heads are in the clouds, and they're that stupid. They're so wrapped up in this bubble, the same bubble that the CBC and the rest of the corrupt media are wrapped up in. They really don't see how ridiculous it is that asking for gender equality in a trade negotiation and climate reparations and all the rest of the ridiculous SJW stuff that Trudeau is demanding is put into a NAFTA agreement. They don't understand that that's not going to fly. Nobody cares about that. And the people that you're supposed to be representing, they don't care about that. They just want a trade deal so that they can get back to work. Okay, so here again is Frank Buckley, this time on the CBC, and it's actually I just threw it in there because it's pretty amusing. Because this time it was with Rosemary Barton, the woman who, who takes selfies with Trudeau and goes, "Oh my God, this is so great!" But here she is, she's laying down the law with this right-leaning economist. Like, what does he know about social democracy? Because hear me living in the CBC bubble, I really know what affects Canadians. So, anyways, I'm just throwing this. So let's have a look.
Well, we also have social liberalism, though, that allows people to be given things, and a government that is trying to correct social inequality.
Over America is just astounding. The United States has a welfare system more generous than Canada. I know you don't believe it, it's true. America has 72 different federal welfare schemes. It has a host of state ones. In terms of welfare per GDP, it is, I think, the second most generous country in the world. Okay, so it does.
When was the last time you lived in Canada, Mr. Buckley?
Last time I lived in Canada was about 25 years ago.
Right. So forgive me if I know more about the country than you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. That's Frank Buckley.
Hope you learned something.
Thank you.
Yeah, Rosemary Barton living in downtown Toronto in the CBC bubble. Yeah, she doesn't know the first thing about Canada. Frank Buckley, I believe, he does at least know about trade and economics and the differences between the two countries. I believe him. He's clearly studied the matter. He's clearly a learned scholar, unlike this this CBC reporter who gets her job because she's a woman and takes selfies with the prime minister. Yeah, I really believe that she has her finger on the pulse of the average Canadian. Let me just give you one last snippet from the interview of Buckley on the Rebel Media, and I want to just get his sort of final thoughts on. He's got some interesting takes here on economics in Canada, which I actually don't entirely agree with, but listen to him first.
But look, I am Canadian. Not only that, but I've written several books favorably comparing Canada to the United States. I've said that Canada, for example, is in many respects more right-wing than the United States. I mean, take a look at what Trump wanted. Trump wanted a Canadian-style immigration system. Trump wanted a Canadian-style system as to corporate taxation. He wanted a relaxation of the regulatory state, which would bring America closer to Canada. So, it's as if Canada is able to pay for its woke, politically correct foreign policy by the fact that it's really pretty conservative at home.
Where I disagree with him on that is that, yes, technically you might say that some of the economic policies of Canada are more to the right. And actually they originate, strangely enough, with the Chrétien government in the 90s when the government debt was just so out of control. It was over 50% of GDP, and government spending was so out of control, and the size of the government in relation to the size of the economy, it was just, everything was out of control, and everybody was saying, predicting, and don't forget the dollar was dropping down to 60 cents US, and we're getting close to that now. And there were predictions that it would drop below 50 cents on the US dollar. It was very critical times, and that's when Paul Martin brought in his austerity budgets, and it cost them a lot of votes in the Maritimes, but they actually fired 50,000 civil servants. And when's the last time? Only if we get Maxime Bernier back in as prime minister will we ever see that move again. And that's how bad it was. The Liberals were actually fired tens of thousands of civil servants, which is great. And as it showed, country doesn't go to ruin. In fact, country runs better. The more civil servants that you get rid of, the better the country just runs. And then costs us all a hell of a lot less money. And of course, they had to lower corporate taxes. They didn't lower income taxes, but they had to lower corporate taxes because they had to attract capital investment to the country. Now, of course, Trudeau's doing the exact opposite. He's doing it, and the NDP government in British Columbia is helping him, and the NDP government in Alberta, not as bad as British Columbia, but they're helping the federal Liberals along the way of just driving foreign capital out of the country. And of course, when you have that, you have less, trade and investment. Obviously the economy tanks, and we run up the debt, which is exactly what they're doing. So it wasn't really so much that Canada is inherently more conservative. those policies only came as a result of absolute necessity after decades of rampant liberalism and massive government spending and creating a huge bureaucracy, starting with Trudeau Sr., and then nothing really changed under Mulroney that much. The taxes came down a bit, but then of course he brought in the GST. So nothing really changed, and then it was only out of complete necessity that Paul Martin brought in the austerity budgets, and then it was continued somewhat, not as actually as extreme under Harper. It was so funny. I mean, all these people that, under the 10 years of the Harper government talking about, oh my God, he's a Nazi and democracy. If you actually look at the policies between the Chrétien government and the Harper government, there's very little daylight between them. I mean, they were more aggressive. I mean, they had, obviously, the Harper conservatives had a much more realistic, aggressive foreign policy than any liberal government of any stripe of any generation has had, with the possible exception of Wilfrid Laurier, if you want to go back to the early 1900s. But anyways, okay, I digress. That aside, obviously, very interesting comments from Frank Buckley, and I loved his take on Canadian media, and I loved his absolute. I really enjoyed more than pissing off Rosemary Barton. Although that was pretty good, but just the first clip at the beginning of this podcast when he just left the CBC reporter just flabbergasted. Like, oh my God, you can't say that. Okay, but anyways, one last clip. This is just to underline how completely idiotic Chrystia Freeland, the woman that's trying to negotiate NAFTA, probably the most important trade policy and vital to Canada's economic health. Just to underline how completely incompetent this woman is. Here she is, one last little clip of her being interviewed on the CBC.
The European Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, and I call each other sisters in trade. We sign our emails hugs. We sometimes
actually do that?
Yes, we do.
Wow.
We sometimes send each other smiley faces in particularly difficult moments.
So we have a middle school teenager negotiating NAFTA against one of the most, against the government headed by one of the wiliest negotiators of the last half century. We're doomed. We're doomed under this government. If you lose your job, if your prospects suffer, if you have less money in the bank, if you have less money in your pocket, it's a direct result of voting for this hopelessly incompetent government. I don't know how much clearer it can be. This woman signs her emails to an international trade negotiator with hugs and smiley faces. When it's like, when it's like totally stressful, we do emojis, and that just cheers me up. It's so much fun, and maybe some unicorns and some rainbow. Are you freaking kidding me? And on the other side, they got John Bolton, the guy that basically told the UN to F off. The mind boggles. I mean, I knew this. I knew that voting for a guy because, a guy with absolutely no record because he's got nice hair and a good smile was a recipe for disaster. And I had to watch in horror as the rest of the country thought that would just be great. And I mean, yeah, they listened to the CBC, because why would the CBC lie to us? I mean, Trudeau turned around and gave them $150 million extra in their already hugely bloated budget. But yeah, let's listen to them anyway. Oh my God, people. Okay, I hate to leave on such a downer. That said, after telling you that your economic prospects suck, if you're living in Canada, that is, please feel free, but I'm going to shamelessly shill for myself now. Please feel free to drop $1 or $2 into the virtual tip jar via PayPal or Patreon, or pick up a Bourbon and Bullets t-shirt or hoodie. It's getting a little cooler, so maybe you want to pick up a hoodie, look pretty snazzy, show people that you only care about the important things in life. Other than that, and also, I forget to say this sometimes, but it would really help if you like, share, and subscribe. YouTube is fighting YouTube, and not just YouTube. There's other media companies that are also fighting me on this channel. But if you'd like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, which actually helps a lot, because then they turn around, they try to desubscribe you. So that helps a lot. So if you could do that, much appreciated. And until next time, this has been Bourbon and Bullets.